So welcome everyone to this event. We are hosting this event from the Work on Climate community, collaborating with the Innovate Climate folks. And really, this is a follow-up event to our Climate Investors series event that we conducted last month. Because of the amazing turnout that we had in that event, we decided that we would make this into a series and continue to have different folks who are investing in climate come and share their perspectives and their philosophy on why they find this to be an attractive market, as well as what their point of view is on what makes an attractive opportunity. And just to share other job opportunities at the individual level that are available within their portfolio as well. We just had a small change of speakers. So Ted Dillon, who is going to join us from Clean Energy Ventures, the folks that are with us today, was unable to do so because of some family issues. But we have Lou filling in very generously. And I will allow Pranav, who is representing Innovate Climate, to introduce Lou.
Great. So just before I introduce you, allow me the opportunity to introduce Daniel. Daniel, would you like to come in? Daniel is the brains behind Innovate Climate Careers. Daniel, would you like to come in?
Yeah. Thanks, Pranav. And thanks, Utkarsh, for again collaborating with Work on Climate here. It's always trying to get a big community and have a greater impact. Really quickly, Innovate Climate. Put myself on mute. Is a newsletter that helps startups get more visibility and democratize access for introductions. And I started Innovate Climate Careers because lots of people were signing up for Innovate Climate saying, what's going on in the space, who's hiring, looking for jobs. So the idea behind it is to really help feature job candidates and say, hey, if anyone is interested in an intro, please reach out. Similar with hiring managers to submit their jobs and make intros there. Really trying to put a human component back into hiring and applications, especially in our virtual world that we live in today. Anyways, I will hand it back over to Pranav, who does an amazing job helping me operate, as I'm just one person trying to, help the ecosystem.
Thanks, Daniel. Very quickly, a quick hygiene request to everybody to go on mute, except Lou, of course. I'll just also share the format. So we will be having Lou talk about high level in terms of the philosophy for clean energy ventures and for the businesses that they're backing. This will be for about 10 to 15 minutes. And then it'll be an open Q&A where we encourage the participants, all of us here, to engage with Lou, because I think the crucial point here is to get behind the philosophy. We are just at the starting of this huge cycle, this boom in the climate tech space. And I'm sure there are a lot of information that Lou can share with us from the vantage point that he's had. Very quickly, Lou is the Director of Investments for Clean Energy Ventures. And I think this is, he's very representative of one of the most interesting facets of the space, in the sense that we have senior people like Lou coming in from an amazing background, having more than 20 years of experience as a technologist in the space, having worked with small and large companies, as well as investing in them. Prior to joining Clean Energy Ventures, he founded New World Capital, which focused on investments in the later stage in clean tech. And prior to that, he was the managing director at Ritchie Capital, a hedge fund. And then between 1997 to 2005, he held a variety of positions at General Electric Corporate Research and Energy Groups. So I think this is one of the most interesting parts of this industry that I see, that we have very senior, talented domain expertise come in to kickstart and help and work with businesses. And believe me, I'm from the startup world. We have 22-year-olds, trying to teach business to senior management, right? Which usually ends up in a mess. That's probably one of the reasons we see a lot of burnout. So to have talent like Lou here in the clean energy space is, I think, one of the characteristics and a huge value. Lou, all over to you, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us, Clean Energy Ventures, and tolerating myself as a substitute. Ted, my colleague, who I've come to really love and respect as a brand new baby and a family with COVID. I think they're all okay, though miserable. So that's why I'm pinch hitting today. So I think I want to tell you a little bit about myself and how I got to Clean Energy Ventures very briefly. And then I want to tell you a little bit about Clean Energy Ventures, and then I want to talk about some of the portfolio companies. And I'm probably going to try and discipline myself to do that and leave extra time for interaction if at all possible. So one of the reasons I want to talk about myself is that I've been at the idea of clean tech for a very long time. When I taught high school 30 years ago, I was trying to explain to my students why they should encourage their parents to get ground source heat pumps because it's a much better way to do heating and cooling. And I realized I probably had the wrong audience. At GE, I started out doing gas turbine services, and I really learned at GE. GE was a great place to study the 20th century. Many of you may not remember, there was a company called General Electric. It's a good friend of mine contacted me yesterday. I think he's looking for work. Several of my friends have moved on, but GE was an extraordinary place to learn about how the 20th century was done, at least in the United States, but in some cases globally. And so I got exposure to, how power gen was done, how plastics were made, how industrial systems were powered and controlled, choo-choo trains, all manner of things. And I actually worked with all of these industries. It was just a wonderful education. And when I started out at GE and I was trying to explain to people that we should worry about climate and that solar power might be real, I literally got laughed at. And so to be sitting here now saying, we have 16 portfolio companies with 65 open positions in a wide variety of clean tech. It's hard to express how both just rewarding and bewildering it is to have been at this for so long and to finally see that we're getting traction. And I'm so excited to be able to reach out to what I know is an extremely deep talent pool out there that's motivated to work on these things. And I'm really thrilled to get past my own limited networks, though they're good. I need to meet new people, and we all need to bring different people into this. So really excited about that. So that's just a little bit about like how excited I am to be talking about hiring. Finally, it's just wonderful. So Clean Energy Ventures is in many ways a conventional venture fund. I don't know how familiar you all are with venture, but venture has a couple of weird quirks, which mean that there are lots of good ideas that are not good ventures. And I can talk about that a little bit. But Clean Energy Ventures took a position about 15 years ago when they founded an angel group, the Clean Energy Venture Group. And they basically decided that this was a collaborative sport, and a group of people started investing in each other's startups and coaching each other and helping each other out. And the founders of the group have built in Boston, and I think largely in the Northeast, what became just a very dynamic, very supportive ecosystem where people get to know each other, get exposed to different ideas and so forth. And so one of the things that makes Clean Energy Ventures, the fund, is somewhat distinctive is that we have, depending on how you count, 30 or 40 folk who vary from active venture partners, one of whom is the chair of the board of one of the companies we're going to talk about, and serve on boards. They help recruit, they help train. So we have, for a 7-person venture team, we have 40 people pulling together in the same direction, and that's somewhat special. Another thing that makes Clean Energy Ventures special is that we have an explicit target for investing in companies that have the potential to avert 2.5 gigatons of CO2 equivalent in GHGs. And that has a variety of caveats that come with it. But the main takeaway is we say it right up front as part of our deal screen, because we want to change how entrepreneurs think about what's a worthwhile thing to work on that could get funded. And so by just stating we're looking for those things, we think that that's helpful. We've tried to define, we want a story that's kind of clear about why the world today and the world with your innovation are going to be different, and why people are going to switch, and how many of them you're going to make. Because it turns out making something that is wonderful and magically delicious doesn't matter if you can't sell it. And so by embedding essentially the business model in the GHG impact story, we think that that's very constructive, both in terms of helping select the companies, but helping frame the thinking. So we have about $110 million. We have $110 million under management in the first fund. It's 90% deployed or committed, though we have recycling ability. So we still have dry powder in this fund. But in addition to, for the first time in my life, having 65-ish open positions in our portfolio, we're looking really good on the fundraise. I've been fundraising in this space for so long that to come away with what look like pretty good commitments for almost enough to completely close the fund in the next quarter or two. I think we're probably not really planning on closing the second fund till third quarter. But anyway, the fundraise has gone really well. The excitement's really good. We have carved a niche for ourselves in a couple of ways. One of the things about venture is that the return on investment expectation of the limited partners has a 35 or 40% annual IRR. And I don't know if people are familiar with that or not, but that should make you gag. That's an unreasonable number. In order to do that, you have to do some very surprising things, but also the cost of being late is almost unimaginably worse than in other enterprises, right? So if it takes me 2 more years to do something, the value of my company and net present value of my company is half. So venture is often poorly matched with doing some of the kinds of transformational technology development that is required to decarbonize the world. And one of the things that Clean Energy Ventures has gone out of its way to do is we've partnered up with a whole bunch of incumbents and strategics. And there's a concern with the incumbents being reluctant to change the way they do things. But the incumbents also have market channel and field service support and deep balance sheets and account managers. And reinventing all of that at the same time that you're introducing a new technology is often an unreasonable thing to do. I think if you look at the Tesla timeline and the 3 near bankruptcies and the lies in public that were needed to be told to raise the money, saying I'm going to build a new car company from scratch is fine. It's courageous, and I'm happy that they've been able to pull it off. But it's not a straightforward or really rational path. A lot of what you need to do is you need to invent something that someone like Siemens or Schneider or Total can put into their existing kit and make it perform better and not reinvent the entire business process. We're already trying to reinvent all the technology of industry. Let's not take on too much. So Clean Energy Ventures went out of its way to collect limited partners that can add strategic insight in our deal screening and sourcing. Yes, if this worked, we would want to work with you. That can contribute in-kind capability. We're having, Total engineers helping us with a piece of kit that we want to put inside an oil refinery. And instead of guessing what the requirements would be, we have people who do that, who are on the board, who show up for meetings, and people with very deep pockets, so that when we've reduced the risk and we've demonstrated the thing works, the rest of the money, the next $500 million, can come from more appropriate sources than venture. So I don't want to belabor us too terribly much, but I think those are features that make us somewhat distinctive, if not unique. And that guides a lot of our thinking. Another element of that is we're somewhat fearless, and it's hard on my stomach. We're somewhat fearless in tackling hardware. There's only so much progress you can make with software. If you really track all the data, you can in detail measure we're not making progress fast enough. You need to actually change the kit that you're doing stuff with. And so we've done software. We're passionate about software, but we're not a software shop. We are a shop. The deal screen is really as described, unless it's outside of the expertise of the venture partners, the angels, and the team, which basically right now encompasses things like agriculture and synthetic biology. We won't do those, not because they're not wildly important, just they're hard and we don't have that expertise. But we're going into a lot of spaces. And you'll see when I start describing the individual portfolio companies, how far ranging that can be. we in venture investor speak, we tend to do $500,000 to $3 million in a first tranche, up to $10 million per deal. In the second fund, that'll probably all double because we'll have a little bit more money to play with, and valuations are going up, which is a good thing. And it's frustrating as a bargain shopper, but it's good. It's a good thing. We're very active, especially early on, and we take board seats and we help people hire. You can see, we help people make their plans. We help people with government relations. We help people with suppliers and off-takers. We have 16 companies in the portfolio and a 7-person full-time team, and we're raising a second fund. So you can infer from that we're relatively busy, but in a wonderful way. So let me pause there for a moment. I know this isn't really the structure, but if there's any really important things I should address before I move on to talking about the companies, let me just give a space for that.
Lou, I think we are good for the moment. I think this has been very, very interesting. Yep.
Fantastic. Okay. One of the best things I read a while ago is when someone talks for more than a minute, I lose interest. So I'm worried about that context here, but we'll do the best we can. So I have a cheat sheet in front of me of companies that Ted wanted us to highlight. All of our companies are hiring. I'm not going to go through all 16, but a good sampling. And by the way, I think it is a good sampling. It'll give you a feel for the kinds of things we're doing. So one of the companies is called Industrial. So it's the word industrial missing an I. And I think Ted has to work on the rebranding. I hate that name. But what the company's done, and this is something I did monitoring and diagnostics for GE gas turbines, 20 years ago. So this is a thing that I know how to do. Industrial has gone and figured out a couple of key tricks. They've gotten customers to let them in the door and let them run around and do stuff. And they figured out how to talk to old kit. So they've basically come up with a pretty effective way to gather data from industrial systems that are operating in legacy environments that are hopefully going to operate for a good long time, but to give people the ability to see how they're running. Are they broken? Are they running as intended? Are there opportunities for energy efficiency? You can imagine, and I won't go into this in gory detail. It starts out basically that people find out which kit was broken that they didn't notice. Then they start getting better at figuring out what spares to carry. And then they start coming up with operational improvements, which help efficiency and throughput. And how far that can go, I can tell you from personal experience, is way further than the imagination will lend itself to at first. But in order to do this, you have to get in the door. And so Industrial has gotten in the door with Lineage Logistics, which is one of our partners on another deal as well. And they're doing refrigerated warehouses. And what they've done is a roll-up of refrigerated warehouses. And there are refrigerated warehouses that were basically designed by Wallace Carrier with ammonia chillers, and they've been running for 100 years, which Lineage has taken over. And then there's stuff they built yesterday. And so they have this very diverse fleet of things. And there's an enormous number of opportunities for value creation in watching those. So Industrial right now is looking for a VP of sales, though I think they're hiring pretty broadly in a variety of things related to what we're talking about. And we also have a partnership with Engie, by the way. So in terms of, we have Lineage, which is the biggest, sort of REIT that owns refrigerated warehouses. Engie is an energy major, not an energy, it's a utility major that is very excited about bringing this kind of capability to their customers. And there's just a ton of work to do. Most of it will be sales, but as soon as you make the sale, as you can imagine, we need to plug those things in, get the plumbing working, and figure out how to add value to the company. So that's Industrial. The next one on my list is a company called ClearTrace, which Ted did help rebrand. The original name I forget, and that's okay. So one of the things that has been happening over time is that people are coming up with tricks to get companies to measure something and then brag about it, to try and somewhere between reward good behavior and shame bad behavior, get people to do the right thing. And a lot of people were doing things like buying voluntary emissions credits or buying offsets. And it's become pretty evident that unless you're doing sort of back-to-back sourcing of renewables, it's not really very effective at getting the companies to decarbonize. And whether this particular issue of doing back-to-back renewables tracing ends up being exactly the right thing, it's not the only thing that the company is going to do. But ClearTrace has a launch partner, which is JP Morgan Chase, which is, you know, pretty potent, and Brookfield, which is another giant operator of buildings. And ClearTrace is trying to build the plumbing to track in a blockchain immutable ledger sort of approach. We should be able to see where you bought your electrons and where you used them and demonstrate that they were back to back. And I think that we expect it to grow from there into other areas, but an enormous amount of technology development needs to be done, and they're hiring. Boston Materials is a company, I'm going faster than you can keep up, I'm sorry. Boston Materials is sort of an amazing startup. It was done by basically students, and they built a lab and built kit, and were having customers testing stuff within basically a year of funding, and they're growing gangbusters. And the magic trick that they do is, if you can imagine carbon fiber as a very useful material, but a very expensive material, and people do carbon fiber layups to make mechanical systems, and they trim the ends, and those trimmings are useless, except Boston Materials can recycle them, and they have a trick that allows you to do a layup of layers of carbon fiber composites where they get z-axis, between the layers, interlaminar strength by standing up little chopped versions of the leftover fiber. And you can get drastically different performance out of these carbon fiber members. They can do things that you couldn't have done other ways. And the biggest challenge for them is that if you invent a new trick like that, the applicability is so broad, you have to prioritize it. So they need to do an enormous amount of engineering to make sense of markets, and to make sure they can make something that will create value for customers when they're in sort of early adopter scale. And as you can, they have 9 open positions. They're sufficiently successful that they're hiring a ton of people. And as you can see, in a wide range of things that you might imagine, go with, let me teach you how to make that out of a different material than you used to. Pearl is an energy efficiency company. And one of the things that I had run into, I've been doing energy efficiency, as I mentioned, when I was a high school teacher, I was passionate about energy efficiency. One of the biggest problems with energy efficiency is it's not very sexy. And a lot of people would sell it based on energy savings, and they would want to see that the interventions would pay for themselves in terms of energy savings. And Pearl has done something that I think really unlocks enormous value, which is they point out, if you have an old drafty house with crappy mechanicals, people don't like it as much as if you have a house that doesn't leak and has good mechanicals. And that in fact, and this is the trick that they did, they've persuaded US realtors that this is true, that they can sell the homes for more value. And so if you wanted to create a poll, if you want people to say, hey, instead of just watching the how to rebuild my kitchen thing on the Home and Garden Network, you could actually retrofit your house to be a high performance, high efficiency house. And the return on investment for that comes immediately in the value of the home, and your realtor will help you sell it. That's what Pearl's done. And they've got now a parade of really good energy efficiency contractors who view this as a great network. So we're qualifying good contractors, and we're impacting energy efficiency in a way that hasn't been tackled before. And we're hoping this revolutionizes the energy efficiency industry, and they're growing and they're hiring. EndCycle, I think I must be behind on time. I realize, I apologize. EndCycle does a magic trick combining electrochemistry and filtration, which we're starting out looking at doing battery recycling, but it actually applies to mining. And the very short version of this is, if you imagine that you start out with a ground up pile of mush. In recycled batteries, it's called black mass. And you leach a bunch of metal ions out of it with sulfuric acid. And then you want to sort those ions. EndCycle makes an incredibly effective, compact way to sort those ions and get up to very high purities. And the trick here is that it does it in such a way that remote battery recyclers go from being money losing to money making. We believe that we fundamentally enable that industry to go to the edge, closer to where the batteries are recycled, but it can do it for mining as well. And they're hiring a number of folks. Line Vision does what we call dynamic line rating. So if you think about a transmission line in the grid, what essentially happens is if you run a lot of current through it, it gets hot and the metal gets longer and it sags. And there's a sag limit, both in terms of it might impinge on something else or the angle that it was engineered for has a limit. And people dead reckon the worst case scenario and they limit the line based on that. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has just updated the rules. FERC never does anything. They just updated the rules so that when Line Vision points out to you, hey, I can see how much sag you have on the line, and much of the time there's wind blowing so that they don't heat up as much. You can cram 30, 50% more power through that transmission line. You can drastically cut back on curtailments of renewable energy on a windy day in Texas, for example. And they're hiring. And then we have a couple of others that are sort of in stealth. One is a cement company, and the other is what I think is one of the most innovative electrolyzer companies I've been around. And I spend, those two companies I'm very close with. I mentioned we were very active. Early on with these companies, I play somewhat of kind of an outsourced chief engineer. And my goal is to hire in people so that I don't have to do that anymore. So, and these companies are doing really, really well. So that was a very rapid fire tour of some of the companies, and you can see there's much more to learn about them. And that's probably a good place to stop for now.
Please send any questions that you might have for Lou on the line. Should we move on to the Q&A section for now?
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, that's what I was hoping.
Great.
Absolutely.
How are you on time?
I think we're doing all right, actually. So we normally have anywhere up to 30 minutes, but definitely about 15 minutes for a Q&A. I have a question here coming in from Pervish, which is, what geographic regions apart from the US and EU are going to see large investments in climate tech space, according to you?
So the biggest investment in climate tech is happening in China. I think there's all sorts of problems with that. I'm not going to make a value judgment about it, but if you just count dollars, they're far and away doing more than anybody else. They're also investing in brown tech and other hideous things, which we have to deal with. I think there's significant evidence that India is at least making bold commitments and setting what I think are pretty aggressive targets and making, it's India. They're making mixed progress. Some of it is extraordinary. Some of it is frustrating. In my view, India and China are the key to this. I think you're seeing a lot of South Asia more generally as well. Like one of the things that I saw, I was excited about in my news clipper today was the battery switching company that does battery switching for scooters. They made a big announcement. There are more battery swapping sites in Taiwan than there are gas stations now. I can't imagine when that's going to happen in the US, but I'm really looking forward to it. And that idea, by the way, so if you take a Tesla owner who's really proud of their car and they view it as part of the family, they don't want to swap batteries. They're not the right target market. But if you take someone who has a basic form of transport that they can afford and it's a scooter, in a lot of the world, that's the family car, or that's what I run my business on. And battery swapping is a really good idea for those. And the air quality needs there are so large. I'm really passionate about that. So, sorry for the long-winded answer, but I really think that Asia and South Asia are the biggest areas. I think that the United States has some of the very best technology, and we have really deep pockets, but we have a really screwy regulatory regime. And the Europeans are very, very proud of themselves, and they subsidize massively some things, and we're going to take advantage of that. But the big changes, I think, are really going to happen in Asia and South Asia.
Thanks for addressing that, Lou. And I just wanted to add that the jobs board that I was sharing earlier is available in the notes document, but I'm also going to put it here in the chat in case you want to go back there and look at all of the opportunities that Lou shared. There are a few other questions related to generally looking for work. So the first one for you, Lou, is what qualities do you look for in hiring for startups? Anything outside of technical competence?
So one of the things I think I neglected to mention in my spiel about clean energy ventures, but we're quite serious about this idea that everybody needs to be involved. And so our portfolio companies, as part of taking investment from us, I think with one exception for reasons I can't fully explain, but basically they all adopt our diversity, equity, and inclusion policy. So we want people from a wide variety of backgrounds, in a wide variety of ways, working in a wide variety of places, because there's just too much to do, and we need all the talent possible. So the first thing I want to be clear about is we're actually trying very hard to not just hire people who have my background and look like me, which is a very natural thing to do, but it's very dangerous, and it's not fair, and it's not useful. So we're really trying to reach out very broadly. Secondly, I think there are team cultures here, and there's a couple of aspects that are universal, and then there's a couple that are specific to the companies. The universal is basically got to be, at a startup, your job, whatever you're hired to do, is not what you're going to do for very long. We rarely get the job description exactly correct, and the companies are changing so quickly. So you have to want that. You have to want to get responsibility for things that are outside your comfort zone. You have to want to basically adapt to what happens next. And you have to have really a teamwork passion. If you're someone who really wants to sit and do an orderly task all by yourself, startup world is not a good place for that. So the ability and willingness to communicate and learn and contribute whatever is needed is at least as important as technical specifics. There are areas that you can't really fake. I mean, you have to know a little bit about electrochemistry if you're going to play electrochemist. You have to know a little bit about chemical engineering if you're going to play chemical engineer. But we're also applying a lot of these technologies in novel ways that are outside conventional industry domain experience. So I think I love evidence of that kind of willingness to be flexible. I love evidence that people have done jobs, that they've been in the work world. We are definitely hiring people for their first job. But the most compelling evidence that someone can do the things that we're looking for is that they've done it already. So those are kind of guiding principles. I could probably go on for far too long. So let me pause there on that.
I just have a small follow-up to that myself, Lou. So when you mention, that you're looking for this sort of diversity, not just of experiences, also of the perhaps like cognitive diversity of how people think and so forth. So I was wondering, as somebody myself in like my early career, how would you recommend sort of providing this evidence of, having that flexibility or having that commitment or having that learning attitude? And also, do you have any recommendations for bridging domain knowledge gaps, which are, a big barrier for a lot of folks trying to make these transitions?
So you have the experience you have. And so what I tend to like to see, people very frequently ask me for, make a reference for them and help them out. And what I basically want you to do, and I think this is good practice, is pick a company that you're interested in, learn about the company, learn about the job offering, and then think about your personal experience and write a cover letter that essentially says, I read with great interest that you're doing ABC. I'm really excited to help out. Here's some relevant experience that I think might read on that. And here's my resume I'd love to play. And so essentially show that you're willing to do a little research, show that you're thinking about how you would fit in and why you think it might work, and then presume that your resume backs it up. I think that's the best way you can align. At the end of the day, what happens is we all know we're going to write down, I want these 6 features of the ideal candidate. And the ideal candidate probably doesn't have all 6. That person might not even exist. It might really be that they're kick-ass on 4 of them, and we'll figure it out on the other 2. So I would just really encourage you to share your passion, share your experience, and be open about where you see a gap. And that usually resonates with hiring managers.
Thanks. I think that's really great advice, Lou. There's a couple of questions around the same theme about college students, for instance, who are just about to graduate or who are still in college. Are there any opportunities for folks really, really early in their career, perhaps even nascent in their career? Are there any internships that are available in any of these portfolio companies, or any other advice that you might have?
Yeah. So yes. And the advice about, what I said before in terms of, if you're excited about working with a company, even if we don't have a posting, you can't hurt yourself by saying, I'm really excited about what you're doing. I'd like to find a way to help. I'm trying to encourage our teams to hire more interns. Frankly, I think it's just bandwidth in terms of whether we're doing it, but we all need interns. And the best way for, to get people in actually is intern with the company and, decide if the culture is a good fit for you all. One of our engineers at EndCycle, she's designing, the cells, she's doing the mechanical engineering of the cells. This is her first job out of college, and she's spectacular. And so we're not afraid to hire people early on. I mean, if they completely lack a relevant skill, that may be a challenge, but we are really excited about people who bring a passion and a willingness to do it. So yeah, early stage career is absolutely welcome. One of the challenges that I have is there's some of these things where it would be really helpful if you'd gotten bloody in industry and you knew the kinds of mistakes that people made, but you're not so jaded that you couldn't join a startup and take orders from the young people who started them. That's almost a harder thing for us to do, but we also need to do that. So anyway, across the board, I really need diversity.
Yeah, I think just pulling a bit on the last thing that you said there, I think a couple of questions here around folks that do have some experience or do have some background coming in, and perhaps figuring out how to adapt to some of these newer types of ventures, as you mentioned right now. So we have 2. One is, how can someone with lengthy regulatory experience help emerging energy or climate tech companies and possibly venture firms? And a related question is, how would you recommend seasoned operating executives from tech or startups bring their experiences to help early stage clean tech ventures or perhaps venture firms as well?
Yeah, so let me give you examples of humans that have done these things. There's a guy named Rich Castle, who's a consultant who I worked with at my private equity firm. I really respected him. When Clear Flame Engines was trying to deal with the idea that electrify everything was starting to become the rule, and what we're trying to do is make a decarbonized diesel that burns fuel. We didn't want to be outlawed. we wanted it to be specified, hey, be cleaner or be clean, but don't tell me how to do it. And so Rich essentially has been doing, as a consultant for them, an enormous amount of work. And now I think they're at the scale. We just did a $17 million raise there. I think they could hire someone full time. So in answer to the regulatory experience, I think the easiest thing to do with startups is to start with some consulting. It depends. I don't know how flexible you are personally in terms of cash and prizes and how much reliability you need. But for a startup to afford a full-time seasoned person is unreasonable. But for them to afford part of one and recognize they need it, we're pounding our fist on the table. You need that help. So I would encourage consulting as a route in there. Very often people become insourced if that's the right answer, or they like doing the consulting and changing topics. In terms of operations, we had at EndCycle, we recognized we had this incredibly young team, and they needed mentoring from someone who knew engineering, process, design, practice, standard operating procedures, all of the old fuddy-duddy nonsense that you actually need to do so that your product doesn't hurt someone. But we also wanted to be really fast with the enthusiasm of youth. And we brought in a gentleman who'd been essentially the operations lead in a startup that we worked with before. And we basically defined the job to fit what he was able to do. We had so many gaps. We basically said, can you fill all of these gaps? And he said, I can fill this subset. And we hired him in and empowered him, and he's been spectacular. The company's made wonderful progress. So we're always looking for seasoned operators. And a lot of what we're doing is familiar. I mean, we're machining things, we're sourcing things, we're assembling things, we're welding things. We're doing quality assurance testing, we're writing operating procedures. The fact that we're a startup doesn't change that you need to do that, and we need that kind of experience. They have to be comfortable with the startup world, but that experience is extremely valuable, rare, and we're seeking it. And one of the companies is actually looking for an operations lead. By the way, we have a posting for that. I think you'll probably find it directly if you look in there.
Great. Yeah, that's very enlightening. Thank you for sharing that, especially with these specific examples. Another question on the group chat is, how much time do you spend understanding or projecting future policy developments as a part of the valuation process? So for instance, with renewable energy, things are pretty dependent on current tax credits, which might not last. So how does that play into your evaluation process?
Yeah, so it's a delicate business. The reality is that all businesses work in the context of laws and regulations, and all of them at some level are subsidized or have barriers to competitors that come from the laws that they work under. And so I think you first have to just acknowledge that's a fact. The second thing that you want to do is you want to say, look, policy, especially in the United States lately, is just flaky. And so I'm going to pass a law is irrelevant. I can't analyze a business based on there's going to be a law. And we've gotten into some fairly deep arguments about that. But one of the conversations, for example, is carbon capture and sequestration folks are asserting they can do direct air capture for $200 a ton. First of all, they cannot. They're at $1,000 a ton, maybe. But at $200 a ton, there's not a business there. No one will actually pay you the hypothetical $200. And so we're very reluctant to do that. What we try to do is basically say, based on current law, is your company profitable? Can you make gross margins based on current law? And can you outcompete the incumbents based on cost and performance? We really seek, so you don't have to do it on day one, but we want to see a path to being able to stand on your own. And we want to see, that the entitlement cost is actually cheaper, that you'll start to win. So for example, solar is cheaper than gas power now. That wasn't true when I started this, but I was willing to invest in solar because you could see that as a potential, right? And early on, by the way, I was a big believer in rooftop solar just because electricity is more valuable on the roof than it is wholesale. In the United States, the arbitrage there is 3 cents to 12 or 20 cents, right? So the cost you had to hit, and I did not believe we were going to get there, the cost you had to hit to be cheaper than 3 cents was almost unimaginable. So anyway, so what we look for is evidence of a path to being sustainable. Having said that, you have to acknowledge policy at some level. You have to pounce on policy when it's there. So we try to have the policy be the bridge to when we're cost competitive.
I have a small follow-up question around that. So you mentioned one example of this type of trend that panned out, which is solar, which was perhaps somewhat clear. Has there been an example of when there was something that unexpectedly ended up happening, but looking back in retrospective, you thought that there were indications that this trend could have been predicted but wasn't able to be? Yeah.
So solar is actually I'm quite old. So when I started looking at solar, a panel cost $10 a watt. And if you looked at the learning curve based on the history, we weren't ever going to get to utility scale. And then China threw 10, 20, $30 billion of subsidy and bought us, 10, 15 years of learning. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, they created massive markets so that the balance of system and the installation and all those other things became much more efficient. Right nowadays, it's 22, 25 cents a watt for a panel. It's just shocking to say that out loud. I'm so excited about it. But what that meant was that, the people who were sort of lazy about project management suddenly were the big pole in the tent, right? So that happened 20 years faster than was reasonable to predict, and it was China industrial policy. And the next thing on the list was, when are lithium-ion batteries for cars going to get below $100, a kilowatt hour? Mm-hmm. And I was watching the DOE publish, their roadmap, and I was looking at Nissan's published data, and I was like, DOE's target is worse than Nissan's doing today. So similarly, as China just built out lithium iron phosphate factories in gargantuan scale, so I was fooled the first time, I caught it the second time. How's that?
Yeah, that's pretty good. We have a follow-up question to the earlier one around geographical regions. So for clean energy ventures, a majority of your portfolio companies seem to be currently based out of the US. So do you actually have any plans to diversify the portfolio to India, China, or Singapore, or any of these countries in the coming years?
Yeah, so yes and no. So our limited partners were promised we were going to invest in the United States and Canada in the first fund. In the second fund, we are planning to explicitly say we're going to invest in Europe and Israel, which is not a good answer to what you just asked. Having said that, many of our portfolio companies are doing business globally, and our limited partners include, a utility in Thailand, a wealthy family in India. And, just this morning, I was on the phone with an Indian group about our cement company trying to do deployments in India. So I think while the headquarters may not be in the places you said, we will be hiring in those places. We're going to need local account managers. We're going to need local tech people. I suspect it may be a little bit later in the growth of the companies, but it will happen. And by the way, one of our existing companies, which is Spark Meter, it does all of its business in Africa. So the company's not in Africa, but it does all of its business in Africa, and we have staff there. So I expect we're going to be hiring. If you look at the current postings, they're mostly not there. They're not in Asia or South Asia.
Sorry, I was speaking on mute. We just have one more question, unless anyone wants to ask any follow-up questions. Fairly simple. Can we connect with Mr. Schick on LinkedIn or any other platforms, or is there any way for us to follow, your social media presence?
Yeah, so I'm very happy to have people connect on LinkedIn. I do posts fairly regularly where I'm trying to spread the word about a variety of things. So I'm very happy to have people join me on LinkedIn. I want to caution folks. Scheduling phone calls with me is almost impossible. It's not, it's doable, but it's a long lead time and I'm overwhelmed. But I look at LinkedIn, I answer messages, and sometimes if it's the right thing, I'll escalate to email and then I'll escalate to phone. But I'm delighted to have people follow me on LinkedIn. And if you share things with me on LinkedIn, that's good. But I just want to be clear, I've got about 3,500 folks now. So I'm limited in how responsive I can be, but I try to be responsive.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions on the line before we wrap up the call? Great. So I'm just going to add 3 links in the chat. One is for the Work on Climate group. That's the group that I'm representing, which is a Slack community. I think we're around 6,000 folks now, basically focused around folks looking for work in climate or looking to transition into climate. I've also added the Innovate Climate Careers newsletter link here, which you can go to and sign up. And of course, I added the Clean Energy Ventures jobs board, where you can find all of the companies as well as all of the opportunities that Lou spoke about during this call. Just wanted to thank you, Lou, again for joining us today. I know that you're extremely busy, so we really appreciate you taking the time to actually share all of this with us. I personally really enjoyed hearing your perspective and all of the anecdotes that you shared as well. And just wanted to thank you again for spending the afternoon with us.
Well, thank you so much. And by the way, getting getting connected with passionate people who want to fix these things is very valuable to me. I'm grateful to have had the opportunity.
Thanks, Lou. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of the day. Thanks again, Lou.
Thank you.